So Goodfire is an AI interpretability research company, really trying to answer the question of, what's actually going on inside the mind of a neural net. Um, so kind of the ultimate goal and the ultimate reason why we started everything was like, we just see neural networks kind of going into more and more mission critical contexts. And I think it's going to be enormously transformative for society. But in order to do so, and you want to build it safely, powerfully, reliably. And I think like it's going to be critical to be able to understand, edit, and debug AI models in order to do that. And so that's what we're kind of enabling for the very first time. It's like unlocking the black box of a neural network such that you can intentionally design it rather than just kind of like grow it from data.
What if we could crack open the black box of AI and see exactly how it thinks? Today we're joined by Eric Ho, the founder of Goodfire, who's building tools to peer inside neural nets and understand their minds. Eric reveals how his team has successfully disentangled the mysterious phenomenon of superposition, where single neurons encode multiple concepts, and can now steer AI behavior with increasingly surgical precision. We explore whether interpretability could help us discover new biological insights, edit out harmful behaviors from large language models, and even understand our own brains better. Eric boldly predicts that we'll fully decode neural nets by 2028, transforming AI from black boxes into more intentional design. Enjoy the show. Eric, thank you so much for joining us today.
Of course, yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
First question. Can we ever trust generative AI if these foundation models are very much black boxes?
Can we ever trust them if they're black boxes? So I guess like, maybe thinking about like, what would happen if we were to just kind of deploy AI models as black boxes, like in perpetuity. So the black box way to do this would be like, and I'm kind of assuming that we're playing this forward a few years and we want AI in charge of like really mission critical applications, like maybe being in charge of our power grid or making big investment decisions, maybe even for a seed investment at Sequoia or like a really large, like $1 million like investment decision. And I think like the black box way to make sure that the AI is performing appropriately is like you take a look at evals and you run like a bunch of like evaluations to make sure that it's behaving appropriately in test sets. And then you'd look at its track record and see if it's like, reliable enough to perform across a wide variety of things. And I think like the question then is like, why not take all of this additional signal that you get from looking inside a neural network and trying to play forward like how it's going to behave in a much wider, broader set of situations? Like, why not like look inside and actually like get a bunch more reliability, certainty about how it's thinking, how it's approaching the problem. And I think like you're just leaving a bunch on the table if you're not like looking for all the signal that you can get. So the way that I think about this is like, I don't know, when you're manufacturing a new drug, it's like you can do the black box way of just like seeing how humans respond to the drug in like a clinical trial. Whereas like you could also just like kind of look inside and like look at biochemically, like how the drug is processed or like drug interactions at the molecular or cellular level. And I just feel like there's so much to be learned when you actually like look inside and deeply understand something.
How possible do you think it is to look inside and deeply understand a large language model? Do you think it's on the scale from hopeless, we can't ever understand it, it's just a black box, too many neurons, to we can actually map out the mind of a neural net? I'm curious where you think the field will be.
Well, I'm very biased, but I think it's very, very possible. So I mean, a lot of the people in Mech Interp like come from backgrounds in like computational neuroscience or like cognitive science, and those people, when you're like actually looking inside the brain, you spend so much time like trying to understand like what a single neuron does or just getting any signal whatsoever. And in the field of Mech Interp, you have perfect access to the neurons, the parameters, the weights, the attention patterns of a neural network. So you're coming in with a huge advantage for like at least like you get all of the data that you need. So then the real question is like, how can we make progress? How can we try to understand and seek to understand all of it. Uh, and I think we just got to try. I think it's deeply necessary and critical for the future. And we have like a norm established. We can explain some percentage of the network by reconstructing it and extracting, its concepts and the features that it uses in order to generate its response. And once you have at least a baseline like rudimentary understanding kind of where we're at right now, you can hill climb on that metric and seek to understand like more and more of the network.
Do you think it's going to be necessary for us to understand neural nets to really harness them long term? Because I think many other technologies we've invented along the way, humans didn't really understand the underlying physics or chemistry, but still we were able to make good of medicines or,
Totally.
sort of basic propulsion techniques without understanding, all the physics.
Yeah, I think it's going to be critical for the future, just given how transformative I think AI is going to be. Like, I think AI is going to be everywhere, running mission critical parts of our society, and like we can get really, really far just by treating AI as a black box. But I don't think we can truly be able to intentionally design AI as like the new generation of software without like white box techniques. So maybe one example that I think about is in the early 17th century, you invented like the steam engine, and we're able to just like increase the size of the boiler and increase the amount of pressure going in, and it scaled reasonably well. But steam engines also like blew up. Like, we didn't understand thermodynamics at that time, so we didn't actually know like at what point did like the ideal size of like the boiler or like the ideal pressure or the ideal way to construct a steam engine. And so like after we invented thermodynamics, like things started becoming a lot safer, a lot more reliable, and like huge innovations happened afterwards.
That's
But
pretty
already
amazing.
like, the steam engine kicked off like the industrial revolution. So even just by like treating it as a black box, you get a really long way.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Do you think there's any chance that if we understand neural networks in a computer science context, it might actually help us accelerate our understanding of neuroscience for the human brain?
I think so, but that's that's a big claim, I think. So like we were just having an interesting conversation last night. We had like a dinner together about like uh, do we do we think in language? Do you think in concepts or something else entirely?
Mm.
Like I'm a person that doesn't really think in language. I think much more like conceptually, maybe in like the latent space of models. Whereas like our head of product, Myra, said that she basically is totally faithful to her own chain of thought, like speaks in language, and she basically just thinks like sequentially with like a really, really strong internal monologue. So like sure, it's just like maybe some of these insights that we get like will translate to humans and our own psychology. And I think that's the hope. It's like, yeah, the more that we can understand about AI, like hopefully the more that we can understand about ourselves.
There's an interesting analogy, by the way, that in neuroscience, often things that have gone wrong help illuminate and create insights into the human brain.
Yeah.
People who suffer from specific conditions or people who've suffered particular brain injury types have actually perversely enabled us to better understand the brain accidentally. I wonder if something similar might happen with neural networks as well.
Yeah, I hope so. What's that like popular story about the guy who just like got an iron
Phineas,
rod
yeah.
through his
Yes.
brain and it made him like a totally different person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, there's also this, to add to that, there's this concept of universality where like among totally different neural networks, like similar kind of like circuits or like thought patterns tend to emerge between all of these neural networks. So like even in look, we found in vision models like very similar kind of circuits to our own like visual cortex. And I think like, there's this like idea of universality where maybe like intelligence is just this like thing that you gradient descent to. And then like that's how our brains found like intelligence, and that's how artificial minds would find intelligence as well. Like there's some truth to intelligence.
My own neural net is probably pretty sparse.
It's pretty sparse.
I would love to double click into some of the results you've had from Mech and the broader field and your lab. But before we get into it, can you say a word about Goodfire and what you all are building?
Yeah. So Goodfire is an AI interpretability research company, really trying to answer the question of, what's actually going on inside the mind of a neural net. So kind of the ultimate goal and the ultimate reason why we started everything was like we just see neural networks kind of going into more and more mission critical contexts, and I think it's going to be enormously transformative for society. But in order to do so, and you want to build it safely, powerfully, reliably, and I think like it's going to be critical to be able to understand, edit, and debug AI models in order to do that. And so that's what we're kind of enabling for the very first time. It's like unlocking the black box of a neural network such that you can intentionally design it rather than just kind of like grow it from data.
And if everything goes right, what do you think will be the impact that you all have on the world?
So maybe one metaphor that we like and think about is like, yeah, right now, like you just kind of like grow AI from a seed and then it just like grows like a giant tree and it grows all wild and crazy right now. We don't really know like kind of a lot of the things that it's growing into, and all sorts of like interesting and weird stuff can happen with a really large neural net. But uh, if everything goes right with interpretability, we know like we'll know every single piece of training data affects like the cognition that the model develops, the units of computation that it uses. And I almost think of it more as like bonsai, where you want to kind of like intentionally design and shape and grow the neural network, like still in an unsupervised, like AI driven approach. Like we're not going to hand prune every single weight of a neural network, but I think we'll gain the ability to like during every single piece of the training, post training process, like just intentionally shape an AI model such that it, serves humanity and does what we want.
It sounds like a parallel to the Human Genome Project in some sense.
Yes.
Given some of the work I've done in genetics. So this idea that we need to read DNA, we need to understand the building blocks of life.
Mm-hmm.
And then ultimately now we're starting to edit DNA and use CRISPR to come up with interesting cures for diseases or an ability to edit crops to make them more resistant to pesticides and things like that. So it's a very interesting parallel.
Yeah, definitely. I think we think about that, analogy a lot. And I know you had Patrick Shu on the podcast, at some point as well. And we're working with him at Arc Institute to like crack the code of the human genome as well. And I think there's a lot of really interesting parallels and also direct applications of AI interpretability as well.
Would you go so far as actually making edits? What I heard from you earlier, the bonsai analogy, was a little bit of a shaping, which is quite different in my mind from editing. Shaping to me might be, train and be fit so that your body can survive given a certain DNA. And then there's editing, which is altering the DNA. Are you going to do both?
Yeah, I think in short, yes. I don't know like so interp as a field, like there's still a lot to figure out. It's still pretty new, but I think in bonsai you also prune a lot of branches and you prune a lot of like the areas that you don't want to grow, such that you can kind of shape the overall tree to like grow in the pattern that you want. So I think like the eventual system that we hope to build, like you can ask questions of the model, like why did you come up with this response, and get a faithful explanation, while also being able to make direct surgical interventions in the mind of the model such that we can remove harmful behavior, enhance good behavior, and still remains to be seen whether like it's just like a direct weights modification or like some other like kind of shaping function that is most effective.
If you think of some of the ways that people are trying to prune these bonsai trees today, I think it's a lot of prompt engineering, fine tuning, RL tuning increasingly now. What do you think about that as the approach to kind of steer the behavior of these models versus actually go in and introspect and examine each of the individual neurons?
Fundamentally, like these are black box things, like all sorts of weird things can happen when you like fine tune a model, for example, or like, prompt a model and take it out of distribution and it can say all sorts of crazy stuff. So the paper that's most interesting about this recently, I don't know if you've caught this, is this like emergent misalignment study. No? Okay. This is like Owen Evans' group, where if you fine tune a model on just insecure code, so it's just like bad code that has all sorts of like cybersecurity vulnerabilities, it'll then start doing all sorts of insane things like wanting to enslave humanity or like praising Hitler and other dictators. And it's a really surprising result because it's just insecure code. And so, yeah, it kind of shows that there's like maybe like what you're doing with fine tuning is you're telling the model like, hey, do more of this, less of this, and like almost like enhancing the circuits that you want kind of more of. But you can also have like all sorts of unintended consequences like this that show up. And these circuits, these are still like really alien cognition. Like there's some parallels to humanity, but we really don't understand how these networks think, and they're not like human thinking. So if you enhance the bad code snippets, it also is like fundamentally linked to maybe all sorts of like other undesirable behaviors and properties.
There's sort of a different twist on the nature-nurture debate.
Yeah.
Because in that situation, it almost feels as though you've imbued that particular model with bad DNA, if you will. Just, it's sort of fundamentally an evil thing or a bad thing, and then it ends up with manifesting all sorts of bad behavior in other domains. It's really interesting.
Yeah, maybe. Or maybe these models kind of understand right and wrong. And if you enhance the wrong, then all sorts of other behavior is interlinked and expressed. But I don't know, the way that I think about it, like the models are just like the functions of their training data. And these models are trained on everything, like all sorts of like misbehavior as well. And you want it trained on like incorrect behavior as well, because like otherwise it won't know to refuse harmful requests or to not do a certain set of things.
Do you have an intuition for why different base models have different personalities? Like, for example, the newest Claude series, like I think one of the models, maybe Opus or so on, it is really cares about animal welfare, for example, and the others
really?
don't. Like, do you have a sense for why these models develop pretty distinct personalities?
I think it's just a function of how they're trained, and it's really, really hard to anticipate in advance. Like, yeah, I don't know. I feel like it might just be me, but like Claude 4 Opus 2 is like enormously sycophantic. Like I'll kind of nudge it in one direction and it'll just like agree with me wholeheartedly, and then nudge it in the other direction, like pose a counter example, and it'll just be like, yes, I was totally wrong before. Like nothing I said earlier was correct. And I just think it's like really, really hard. It's like kind of goes back to like the witchcraft almost of training an AI model today, where you're just like throwing in training data into the model and like whispering the incantation of gradient descent, and then like trying to like get what you want out of it, and something pops out, and then it like really cares about animals. Oh, great. Like that's great.
I'd love to talk about your research results so far, both at Goodfire and in the broader MechInterp field as a whole. Maybe could you just give us a 30,000-foot flyover view of, MechInterp as a field? How old is it? What are the key results so far? What are the big open questions?
Yeah. So MechInterp as a field, I think like maybe just like in this tradition that we're building on, I think there are all sorts of studies like looking inside neural networks all the way back when we first, designed neural networks. But I think once we, I think the way that the field kind of thinks about itself, like mechanistic interpretability, was started at like OpenAI with Chris Olah and Nick Camarata and a couple other folks who first put out like this really big circuits thread that posited like three things. One is like there are features in neural networks, which are directions in latent space that represent concepts that the model uses to generate its response. Circuits, these are like features that fire together to create like higher order concepts. The example that they lay out is like you have a car window detector, and then a car like body detector, and then a car wheel detector, and then that's like a car circuit. And universality is the third tenet. Like similar circuits evolve in different neural networks. And so this was like almost like the start of the field of mechanistic interpretability in my mind. And so that really kicked off a lot of interesting research and results in like the features circuits paradigm. And I think like the main players in the field, there's a lot of academic labs that are doing great work, like Anthropic. So Chris Olah is one of the co-founders of Anthropic and building a great interpretability lab there. And DeepMind has an interpretability lab as well. And then we were kind of like the newer entrants on the field and on the stage. I think one of the other really key things to have happened was understanding and mostly resolving superposition. So superposition is this idea that like each neuron is responsible for encoding like multiple concepts. And there are more like concepts than dimensions in a neural network. So if you think about a neural network as like a giant compression algorithm, you're like compressing like the entirety of the internet into like a relatively small number of parameters. And so that means every single neuron needs to encode, or at least every single layer of the model needs to encode more concepts than it has like dimensions. And so there's like this concept of superposition where you have concepts represented as like near orthogonal directions in latent space, such that you can represent all of these concepts in a model's latent space.
Hmm.
And so to resolve this, you have to almost untangle and unscramble a neuron such that it's responsible for like one clean interpretable concept. And so it's like a group at Apollo Research, led by like Lee Sharkey, who's actually now at Goodfire, first kind of pioneered like sparse autoencoders for language models. And Anthropic also like really popularized this with their like big paper like towards monosemanticity. And then right afterwards, like scaling monosemanticity, showing that you can essentially unscramble these neurons into higher order concepts reliably and at scale with like arbitrarily large neural networks. And I think that was a really big moment for interpretability where you can now, in a totally unsupervised way, unscramble neurons of a neural network to understand them and get clean concepts. So the concepts aren't like totally clean yet. You can't like edit them super well. There's all sorts of problems with this, but like it's almost like a really big step forward for the field such that like that we can do this in an unsupervised way and the techniques and interpretability scale, which is really important.
Does that mean the superposition isn't real, or that you, almost like Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, you sort of collapse it at a particular moment in time to know that in this instance it represents a particular direction?
So I think it means it was real. Like neurons are responsible for, encoding multiple concepts such that once you unscramble them, then you can do really interesting things with like a clean neuron. So the way that we do this is like using an interpreter model, train on the activations of a base model, and then now you have all sorts of neurons in the interpreter model that represent like theoretically clean, sparse concepts.
In the interpreter model, not
In the interpreter
original
model.
The original model still has this characteristic of superposition.
That's right.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And in the interpreter model, you unscramble these neurons and you associate these concepts with the concepts in the base model that you're trying to interpret. And then you can do interesting things with it.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
How solved of a problem is this then? If you've already been able to kind of disentangle the superposition, then haven't you already mapped out the mind, so to speak, of the neural net, and what's ahead?
I think partially. I think it's a partial mapping, and the technique has all sorts of flaws as well that we can improve upon. But I think like it gives us the first step towards understanding these models, especially going from toy model to like actual network that people care about. So we've done a bunch of work recently on R1, so which is 671 billion parameter mixture of experts models. It's a big boy model, and like the techniques scale really nicely all the way up to that point because it's just more AI, more training of an interpreter model.
So obviously, I presume there's an asymptote here to understanding because the models are going to get more and more complex over time, and we're going to beef them up.
Yeah.
And so I'm guessing it's sort of, like the Battle of Sisyphus. At some point, this is a never-ending pursuit, which is great. Is that correct? Do you agree with that?
In some ways, but I also think that so the techniques that we've developed work on toy models all the way up to big network that's like more capable and more intelligent and better. And I think like the techniques also scale effectively with model intelligence. So one part of our pipeline is that for every single latent concept in our interpreter model, we associate that with and try to we get another language model to reason about like what that concept actually represents in the base model. So this is a concept called autointerpretability, which Nick Camerata, who's at Goodfire now and invented this technique at OpenAI, um, pioneered. And this technique, because it's a language model reasoning about what a neuron represents, scales with the quality of the language model. So it actually gets better. So because we use AI in order to understand AI, like the better that our models are, like these analysis agents are at interpreting like what's actually going on, the better we are able to understand them.
Got it.
And our interpreter model techniques also, it's just like if we develop better interpreter models, they theoretically should translate to more and more intelligent and larger networks, because these are like unsupervised scalable techniques. And that's like the paradigm in AI interpretability.
Got it. When do you think you reach a minimum threshold that makes you feel it's ready for a real world application? Maybe we're there already.
I think we're there.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
I think the first real world applications are already out there, and I think we're there on like the very, very early applications. Yeah.
Can you share more about this?
Yeah, I was being unnecessarily cryptic. So, a couple of the partnerships that I'm most excited about. So we worked with Arc Institute, like I mentioned a little bit earlier, to understand and interpret Evo2, which is their like kind of DNA foundation model. So it's a sequence to sequence model. So it like takes in a sequence of nucleotides and it predicts the next nucleotide in a sequence. And our theory is like this is a narrowly superhuman model. So we really like to work on narrowly superhuman models because it can teach us something about the world that humans don't really know. And so the idea is like this model is representing just an enormous amount about the biological world in order to generate the next and properly model the next nucleotide in a sequence. So what we did was we sought to understand like what does it actually know such that it can model the world so effectively. So what we did was we trained sparse autoencoders on the activations of this model, extracted all sorts of features that were related to concepts that the model like should know, like kind of normal biological concepts that we have like really strong ground truth annotations for. So these are like tRNAs, RNAs, start coding sequences, like all sorts of like biological concepts that we have ground truth annotations we associated with this model. And then the question is like, okay, now we have all of these other features of the model that we've extracted. What do they mean? What are they? They might just be ways that the model is computing and thinking, or they could represent, like novel biological concepts that the model is using to generate the next, nucleotide in a sequence.
That's really interesting. I mean, there was for a long time there was this idea that we have a bunch of junk DNA. You may have read about this, and turns out a lot of that DNA actually serves a particular purpose in a different part of evolution, or that they govern the expression of other genes. And so, nature generally doesn't want to harbor things that don't have value because it's expensive. Just from a biological system point of view. So that's super interesting. I'm looking forward to the results.
Yeah, totally. And I think like hopefully using unsupervised AI techniques, like we can better understand like what all of these, portions of the DNA are actually doing. Like maybe we can discover the idea of junk DNA like faster, or understand that like DNA is not junk DNA like faster, and or like just discover like totally novel things that like genes are doing and expressing within us. Yeah.
Where's the research as far as going from understanding and mapping towards editing? So, for example, being able to reach in and change this weight from here to there. I'm curious if you all have any results there yet.
Yeah. So we've done most of our editing work on like language models and image models. Like our most recent kind of release was a paint with Ember. Ember is our like kind of foundational infrastructure for interpretability. And what we were able to do with this like image model demo was targeted, precise control over an image model by painting. So we could extract latent concepts like a a dragon or dragon wings or an ocean or a pyramid, and then take these concepts and directly intervene on like the portion of a canvas that we want to intervene on. So you can paint on a dragon with wings and then add like a crowd in the corner and add like a pyramid. And it's a really fun demo that's just like a kind of a joy to play with. So it's out right now. Anybody can play with it. It's just like paint.goodfire.ai. But we're able to, I think, reasonably intervene in like certain situations on a model's latent and like steer the model to do what we want. But we haven't quite cracked like the idea of direct precision surgical edits that like create a new model that you want to like use and doesn't have like any unintended side effects. So that's like still, something that we're pushing on and trying to figure out.
Do you think that's where the field ultimately goes? Or do you think people are focused on different parts of the field?
I think there are many places where the field is going to go, and this is one of them. Like interpretability is almost like such a general term that I'm biased, but I think it's just like governing and underlying like all aspects of AI. It's like anytime you prefer to take a white box approach to doing something versus a black box approach, like interpretability can probably help in the future. So how do you select your training data? Maybe you want to understand like whether the training data is surprising to the model before like putting it into the model, because then it can have like the most impact on training. Yeah, just like in every single part of like the AI development stack, I think like interpretability will help and change the way that we do things.
If AI foundational models go the way that a lot of software has gone, certainly infrastructure software, where much of it is open source or open weight, is there an opportunity for you to play an invaluable role in judging the biases or likely outcomes of using different open weight models?
I think we could. Yeah. So there's maybe like two areas of research that we're interested in that intersect with this idea. So auditing. So like, how do you take a model, understand like what's going on, find like problematic behavior and good behavior, hopefully get rid of the bad behavior and enhance the good behavior. So I think like as AI gets deployed in more and more mission critical contexts, it's like that becomes more important. And then also model diffing. So it's like when you have two checkpoints of a model, like how do they differ from each other and what's changed? So the recent kind of like GPT-4o like was enormously sycophantic for a period of time. Just really gassing up the user, like
Still
telling
is.
them that they're doing great.
Still is.
You still is?
Pat recently asked it who the most handsome Cribble board member was, and it was like, definitely Pat Grady. So
Definitely
still a bit
Pat
sycophantic.
That's so good. That's so good. Yeah. But yeah, like model diffing, like you should be able to detect like how a model has changed from checkpoint to checkpoint, like what surprising things have happened that were unintended, that are now contained in the network that weren't there before.
Why do you think it was so hard for OpenAI to roll back to a less sycophantic version of the model? And in an ideal state of the world, is there almost a dial and a knob that the OpenAI guys could tune on a scale of 0 to 100? How sycophantic do you want the model to be? Like, do you think we can get there?
I don't know what questions you're asking of the model, by the way, because I never encountered this particular problem.
It always does this with me. And then sometimes it's brutal the other way. I ask it the best AI podcast, and it lists 20 things with no training data. I ask, what about us? It's, I didn't want to give a biased result.
That's so funny. Well, that's part of what users want, right? They kind of want sycophancy. Like, people want to hear what they want to hear. So when you RL a model, I think fundamentally you're going to get, I think it's just kind of a symptom of like RL. It's like this is what users want. This is user preferences.
Along the way, you've dropped some names, and it seems as though most of them have ended up at Goodfire. I presume there is a certain number of very talented people in this field, and you've unfairly seemed to gather them. Can you describe a little bit more about your team and what you've pulled together?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think we have a really fantastic team, and that's what we've been, spending a lot of our time on the last year, just kind of like, I think assembling a team of, world-class interpretability experts that really have a shot of cracking this problem. So it starts with my, like co-founders. I had worked with Dan Balsam, our CTO, for many years at my previous company. And so he's our CTO, and our chief scientist, Tom, who founded the interpretability team at Google DeepMind way back in the day. And yeah, and just have assembled many of like the early folks in the field. So Tom, Nick Camerata, who's like working very closely with Chris Olah, who is generally considered like the founder of the field of Mechinterp. And Nick like was on all of the original like circuits papers and helped like build everything out at OpenAI. Lee Sharkey, who's the first who pioneered like sparse autoencoders on language models, and is now working on some really interesting work in weights-based interpretability. So most interpretability techniques that have been deployed into applications are in concept space and activation space, and he and his group are working on weights-based interpretability techniques. And we've also just like kind of pulled in senior scientists from other fields who care a lot about interpretability and just kind of have realized that this is one of the most important problems that we can work on. So Owen Lewis, who was a senior staff RS at Google, working on coding agents, came over and is now like leading a couple directions here for us.
And you're recruiting, right?
And we're hiring, yeah, scientists, engineers. I think it's like we are hiring scientists, and that is like deeply important for the future of the field. But also like it's hard to just like it's hard to overestimate just how important like good engineering skills are.
It's an incredible team.
Proud of the team, yeah, for sure.
This seems like core functionality for any of these foundation model companies to have. And as you mentioned, Chris Olah was at OpenAI, now at Anthropic. OpenAI has their interpretability team as well. How do you think about the rationale for having a standalone Mechinterp research company versus being inside one of the labs that should care deeply about this?
I think we can just take a really different approach if we're independent. I think the benefit of being independent is we can think independently, push things forward independently, and also get like a broader view of the ecosystem. So usually if you're within a lab, you're kind of doing interpretability work on your own models and like kind of pushing forward the field in that way. And you can make incredible progress that way. But I really do think that like a unique third-party perspective is deeply necessary in the field. And I think like, yeah, just given the team that we've assembled, like a lot of those folks like agree with that, and that's why they've joined. And also like gives us like an ability to work with lots of interesting partners across different domains, and we can kind of unify those insights across all of these different domains that teach us more about like the inner workings of neural networks more broadly. So we work across modalities like genomics models, exomic models, image, video, like language, and also across model architectures. And I think all of that just helps.
Anthropic invested in you all, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Say more about that and how you partner with them.
Yeah, so they I think we were their first ever investment. They put in a check in our last round, and I think they just really care about interpretability and really kind of see the future as we do, where interpretability is just like pretty critical to the future. So Dario just published an essay called like The Urgency of Interpretability, and it's like one of his like 4 essays that he has on his site, and just like talking about like how he views this as almost like a race, and we see that very similarly, a race to get interpretability prior to super intelligent, really intelligent AI models. I just think it's like deeply critical to be able to understand these models before we have, like in his words, like a country of geniuses in a data center.
Do you think interpretability can help us with open models? And, I think some people have a fear that, models trained in other countries that may or may not be enemies of the United States, have different nationalist properties. Can interpretability help us understand and even modify those for the American variant of some of these models?
Yeah, well, I definitely think so. I also think it's like relatively easy to like if you take like a DeepSeek model, for
Yeah.
example. It's relatively easy to just like tune it or add in more training data to remove a lot of the like
Hmm.
propaganda in the model. And but yeah, I think like interpretability can help like understand like what's actually inside of the model, and then also like change it and edit it to like serve whatever end purpose that you want.
How long do you think before you're going to be called in as a witness in a very important trial to try to understand why a model did something in particular?
That's a good question. I think, oof, few years. Who knows? I think it's really, I mean, we're all sitting in like the Bay Area right now, but at this point, I'm pretty AGI pilled in that like I think AI progress will be pretty fast and pretty quick and transformative to society in ways that are really difficult to anticipate from where we're sitting right now. And so, yeah, I do think that there will be a couple, like big failure cases of AI models, and whether it's me called in or somebody at a big lab or some other expert. Um, I think that we're going to want to uh, be able to explain a model's outputs. Yeah.
I agree with you on the rate of development, by the way. I think it's, I'm sure you've read these articles. The human brain doesn't intuit compounding.
No. I don't
And
know.
so, I've even thought back to 20 years ago when I first met the self-driving car initiatives, and Sebastian Thrun's team from Stanford had won the DARPA challenge. You could sort of see the glimmers of self-driving cars, but even then, if you'd said, 20 years later, you would have a self-driving car in San Francisco take you around, I'm not sure it would have been obvious that would be true. And maybe it took a few years longer for the true visionaries. I think the same is going to happen with AI. I don't think we fully fathom what the world's going to look like in 2030 or 2035.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it's just really hard to predict, like even if we feel like it's going to happen really, really quickly, it's hard to predict all of the ways that society will be transformed.
Good note to end on. Should we do some rapid fire?
Some predictions?
Yeah. We need
Let's
some
do it.
predictions. These are recorded, so we'll hold you to it.
Great. Yes. Yeah.
Maybe
Eric in 2035 will look back on how wrong he is with all these predictions. Yeah.
Okay, maybe first, inference time compute is the next important vector to scale models. Agree or disagree?
Mostly agree. I think it's one of the things that we can scale up on. Yeah.
What application category do you think will break out next after code?
I think there will be a lot of enterprise transformations that happen. So just like automating like manual routine tasks that people are doing like many, many times a day.
Employment impact from AI?
Vast and vast, but once you cross a chasm, I think it happens quickly. I think well, my last company was helping find early career jobs for people and using AI to automate that. And I think that that's where we're going to feel the impact first.
I agree. Recommended piece of content or reading for AI fans, maybe specifically in your field?
I think the original circuits thread that I was referencing a couple of times, like that's still fantastic.
What's either an AI app or maybe just an experience that you've had with AI that has blown you away recently? Something that just took a breath away.
I think my like one of those moments that you really just like feel how fast AI is happening. Like when I first played with O1 Pro, like that was a model that I just really felt like was actually reasoning about the world, and seeing like the kind of cross domain transfer to, I would ask it a strategic question, and it felt like it would actually understand like all of the levers that I was considering with the business, and considering that like at least relatively thoughtfully and being a thought partner. And that's both exciting because I now have this model that I can talk to about all sorts of critical problems, but and not just, of course, like trust it blindly, but also like it's like, wow, how did this happen?
Interesting. One of the things I've learned recently is that AI is still struggling to understand humor. And one of my partners, Andrew, actually had this joke that humor is humans' way of showing off intelligence without actually explicitly bragging. And so maybe there is a lot of embedded intelligence in humor. Do you think interpretability will help us pinpoint
To
the
figure
source
out
of humor?
humor. Yeah. To figure out why AIs don't have a sense of humor.
Or will help them to
Yeah.
develop it?
Perhaps. Who knows? Yeah. I hope so. Yeah. I can, I think if I, wake up to a model like telling me jokes in Roelof's voice, that would be that
That'd
would
be
be a
terrifying.
great way.
Okay, we'll close with one last
Yeah.
question on a prediction in your field. Do you think we will ever reach the point where we feel like we confidently understand the features, the circuits, the patterns, the weights of a neural net? And if so, what year do you predict we'll reach that point?
I think we can. I think that it might not look like what you just said, like the features, the circuits. I think it requires maybe a reconceptualization of what's actually going on inside the model, like a deeper, more fundamental understanding of the units of computation of a model. It's almost like discovering truths about the universe or about like neural nets in this case. But yes, I think we're on track. I think we can do this.
And what
I think we
year?
can do this in and hold me to this in 2028. We're gonna figure it
Wow.
all out. Yeah,
Fantastic.
yeah. Just a few years. I think we're close.
Just in time for the LA Olympics.
Yeah, that's right.
Just in time for your next round of funding.
Yeah.
I'm kidding. Eric, thank you so much for doing this today. Roelof and I loved the conversation.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure. Yeah, so much fun. Thanks for having me.